Everyone, and welcome to this Global Government Forum webinar looking at how governments can meet their net zero targets. My name is Mia Hunt. I'm editor of globalgovernmentforum.com, a media title focused on bringing together public and civil servants from around the world to share best practice. We are delighted to be joined by Advanced Bacterial Sciences as the knowledge partner for this webinar. This is part of a series of climate change focused webinars we're running in the lead up to COP27, which I'll tell you more about later. But today we'll be looking at what governments can do to tackle climate change, both for their countries and in government itself through operational efficiencies and the delivery of sustainable public services. To date, 137 countries have made net zero commitments, according to the Net Zero Tracker website. At COP26 in Glasgow last year, countries agreed to develop new strengthened pledges, and we expect to hear more about those at COP27 in Egypt next month. To fulfil their pledges and commitments, governments need to put in place plans to decarbonise large swathes of their economy and begin building the capacity to make it happen. So in today's session, we'll be looking at how governments have developed net zero plans, how they are monitoring those plans and the milestones ahead, whilst also looking at climate diplomacy, clean tech, and the relatively small changes that can lead to big positive outcomes. We have a brilliant panel, and we're going to start with short presentations from each of our four panelists, who I'll introduce you to in a moment. And we will then move on to questions from you, the audience. So please do ask any questions that come to mind at any time during the webinar by typing it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we will get through as many of those as we can. So on to the panelists. Today we have Jim Watson, Director at the UCL Institute of Sustainable Resources in the UK. Jim is Professor of Energy Policy at University College London and a Research Director of the Climate Compatible Growth Programme. He was previously a Director of the University of Sussex's UK Energy Research Centre. His research focuses on climate change, energy and innovation policies, and he leads programmes on the UK energy transition as well as international collaborations. He frequently advises UK government departments and other organisations, and he is chair of the Technical Advisory Group to the World Bank's Energy Sector Management Assistance Programme. Next, we have Abjl Douglas, a climate change analyst at Panama's Ministry of Environment. Abjl, an environmental engineer, has been a junior consultant for the United Nations Development Programme. As a climate change analyst, he has worked with the Ministry of Economy and Finance on the development of a national tagging system that tracks climate expenditures and identified public projects that contributed to Panama's updated 2020 NDCs and Sustainable Development Goals. He is also a facilitator of the Academy of Young Leaders on Climate Change in Panama and has carried out research on the incidence of climate change on the country's Pacific coast. We also have joining us Maria Julian, Senior Advisor and Director, International Science and Technology Collaboration at the US Department of Energy. Maria, who is also Senior Advisor to Assistant Secretary for International Affairs, is responsible for managing the Energy Department's International Science and Technology Collaborative Programmes and advising leadership on strategic priorities. Maria leads the Energy Department's efforts in Mission Innovation, a 25-member global organisation that drives forward global clean energy innovation, and also leads the US government's Net Zero World Initiative, through which it partners with countries to develop tangible clean energy projects that meet energy needs and decarbonise economies. And last but not least, we have Gareth Hughes, Chairman and CEO of Advanced Bacterial Sciences. Gareth is a serial entrepreneur who, through Beetle Capital Partners, had advised and invested in a number of companies, projects and funds across the natural capital spectrum in the clean energy, energy efficiency, batteries, water, waste, forestry and agriculture sectors. He co-founded Climate Change Capital in 2002 and was Managing Director of Marsh & McLennan Enterprise Risk, during which time he was responsible for the development of its European climate change initiatives. He is Chairman and CEO of Advanced Bacterial Sciences, which focuses on next generation intelligent design bacterial treatments for waste and water treatment and management, pollution remediation and agriculture. So we're going to get some opening comments from each of the panelists now, and we will go to Jim first. Jim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mia, and thanks everyone for coming. So I'm going to focus on the UK's record of climate action. And my opening remarks, I'll basically cover three things. One is the UK's climate change legislation and policy framework, and where that came from and what it says. Secondly, how we're progressing so far since that legislation was put in place in terms of reducing our emissions. And thirdly, more up to date, is how climate action has been affected by the energy price crisis and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So back to the climate change policy framework. So it's almost, I think, now 20 years since the UK first agreed to have a long-term climate change target in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So originally, the UK government committed to a 60% reduction in emissions compared to 1990 by 2050. And I think that target dates back to something like 2003. But we didn't stop there. And actually at the time, although it's quite hard to believe in the current environment, that all political parties actually were almost competing with each other to see who could be the greenest in the UK system. So it was actually the Conservative centre-right party in opposition that really pressured the government into going further. And that was driven by, of course, increasing awareness of climate change and its impacts, and a big campaign by civil society groups to get further action going. And it also suited the centre-right party because they wanted to rebrand themselves as being more progressive and modern, and part of that was being more vocal on environmental issues. So the outcome of all of that was the first in the world, I think, or one of the first at least, Climate Change Act's piece of legislation enacted in 2008, which basically put that long-term target into law. It increased the ambition to 80% reduction by 2050, so 80% of emissions reduction since 1990. But I think just as important, it put in place a system of what we call carbon budgets. So that is a requirement to reduce national emissions every 5 years, starting with the period 2008 to 2012, and then every 5 years from there. And it also established an independent committee. So this is something that now other countries have sought to emulate, not only government actually committing to action and legislating targets, but actually having a committee to recommend where those targets should be set, but also to monitor progress, to actually say, well, how are we doing and are we on track? And if we're not on track to meet those targets, what more does government and other actors need to do? So that committee reports annually to our Parliament, and the government has to respond, even if it's just to explain why we've gone off track. More recently still, I mean, Mia was talking about net zero targets in the introduction. So the UK, again, was one of the first to sign up to that. So we signed up to that in 2019, so 3 years ago now. And that really changed the game, certainly for the UK and probably for many other countries too. So you weren't, industries weren't able to claim that they belonged in the 20% of emissions that weren't going to be reduced, because those 20% don't exist anymore. And it also brought a much greater focus on technologies and other measures to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, whether it be through afforestation or through engineered removals through things like direct air capture. So it's really shifted a lot of the discussion and a lot of the focus of our action. So what has that led to so far? Well, so far, if you look at the headline figures, the UK is continuing to do well, despite all of the challenges that have happened since 2008, you know, a global financial crisis, a global pandemic, and now a pretty serious war in Europe. So we've achieved already a 47% reduction in emissions from 1990. So we're well on the way to meeting that original target of 60% and almost halfway to the net zero target. Emissions rose last year because of recovery from the pandemic. So I'd say don't look at the last 2 years of data, because they don't tell you very much about the long-term trend. There have been good successes in some areas. So the power sector has cut its emissions by 2/3 in a decade through shifting away from coal and for investing more in renewables. And industry emissions have declined quite rapidly, partly due to economic restructuring, a shrinkage of the size of that sector in our economy, but also due to energy efficiency measures. We've had much less progress in other areas like transport and buildings, and the buildings, of course, include those buildings owned by government itself or that provide public services. Buildings were doing fairly well till about 10 years ago, but policy since then hasn't been particularly effective at all, and actually has been absent in many cases. So there are some big challenges ahead. We still have to shift away from our gas-based heating systems, which is a serious issue now with the level of gas prices we're facing in many countries, including the UK. Decarbonising the rest of industry is going to be quite tough because of the technological limits and the costs, and removals and land use changes in order to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases emitted and to improve the amount of greenhouse gases being absorbed is also going to be quite tough, because it brings climate action, agricultural policy and broader land use policy together, and that some of those issues are quite politically difficult. So the watchdog that was set up in 2008, the Committee on Climate Change, has been increasingly critical of the government, not of the overall trajectory till now, but just the lack of detailed policies to continue that momentum and meet our future budgets and targets. Finally, a word or two on the energy crisis and the war in Ukraine. I mean, certainly for me, this should have been a reason to just double down on climate action. So shifting away from fossil fuels, making our economy more efficient, using less energy, are not only going to help our emissions, but they're also going to help our energy security and reduce the bills of households and businesses. But our government has had a rather ambiguous response to this. On one hand, it's said, well, we need to do more on low carbon supply, nuclear power, new energy carriers like hydrogen, which in principle could be low carbon. But actually those are quite long-term options. They're going to take a while to be invested in. And the quicker, cheaper options, such as onshore wind and solar farms, have received, to put it mildly, mixed political signals. The demand side is really missing in action in their policy since the invasion of Ukraine. There hasn't been what I would expect, which is a large-scale program to upgrade our buildings like there has been in other European countries and other countries around the world. So that's an area where the UK could do a lot more. And even recently, it's been suggested that we should have a public information campaign to help people reduce their use over this winter. But even that has been vetoed by our Prime Minister. So in that sense, the UK policy is not going in the right direction. There's also a focus on more development of fossil fuels, new licenses for oil and gas development in the North Sea, and a lifting of a ban on fracking, although we never really have done any fracking in the UK. We've just talked about it rather a lot. So neither of those are actually going to help our prices, but I think it's tempting by some governments to show that they're doing something by perhaps increasing their production of oil and gas, even if that is in complete tension with our climate ambitions. So I'll leave it there for now and look forward to getting involved in the discussion a bit later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim, for that overview and for getting on to the issue of the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis and what that will mean for climate change action. Hopefully we'll get onto that, discussing it in more detail in the Q&A session. Abjl, we will come on to you next.
Hi everyone, my name is Abjl. Today I have the pleasure to be speaking about Panama mainstream process of including climate change in the Ministry of Economy and Finance, and with the objective to increase the public climate finance. Next, please. So where is Panama? Panama is a small and transcontinental country in the middle of North America and also South America. And its capital and largest city is Panama City, whose metropolitan area is the home of nearly 2 million of people. Also, an interesting fact about Panama is that Panama has the Panama Canal, that is an artificial waterway that connects the Atlantic Ocean with the Pacific Ocean, and also divides North and South America. And the Panama Canal shortcut greatly reduced the time for a ship to travel between the Atlantic and also the Pacific Ocean. Next. Great. So an important fact also about Panama is that Panama is one of the fewest negative country in the world. This means that, as we all know, carbon dioxide is a leading greenhouse gas emission that is produced by human activities. High levels of carbon dioxide increase the amount of heat that is trapped in the atmosphere, as we all know, and this is one of the biggest causes of climate change. Most countries produce far more carbon dioxide than the world ocean and plant life are able to absorb. These countries are contributing to the effects of climate change in a big way, but Panama stands out from the crowd. According to Panama New Forest Map that was published this year, 64% of the country is covered by forests. This is a large amount of trees that cover Panama, and also it made us one of the 3 carbon negative countries alongside Bhutan and Suriname. This means that Panama absorbs more greenhouses than it produces. Next. Great. Also, Panama is highly vulnerable to climate change impact. And we have some studies according to the World Bank and on its publication Climate Risk and Country Profile indicate that Panama ranks number 14 among the countries with the greatest exposure to multiple nature hazards, with 50% of its area and 20.5% of its total population, it is exposed to 2 or more hazards. Also, the Climate Change Vulnerability Index of Panama, published in 2021, shows that the country is highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, showing disaster result from hydroclimatic threats such as floods, a longer dry season, and which result in negative impacts on important economic activities of Panama, as agriculture, the operation of the interoceanic canal, also the energy production, infrastructure, and also other activities. Next. Taking this in account, and as we all know, climate crisis is a worldwide concern due to its negative impact on the economy, the environment, and also society. Among this, it has direct and indirect effects on public finance, which represent threats to fiscal stability and also sustainable development. These are associated, as we all know, with higher public spending to finance reconstruction and also recovery from extreme events, and also a reduction in tax collection. Based on this, the Ministry of Environment of Panama, working with the Ministry of Economy and Finance, has developed a tool to integrate climate change into public institutions with the aim of reducing the loss associated with climate events in Panama. Next. So this is a tool. The name of the tool is a guide for the implementation of climate change labels for public investment projects. This guidance and frameworks define step-by-step how to identify and guide a public investment project so that it can have climate change criteria. It is direct for the Economy, Ministry of Finance in Panama, and also for other public institutions of all the country to evaluate public investment projects that are present and also identify those projects that meet adaptation, mitigation, and also cross-cutting areas. These tools and the labels, as we call it, they are going to let us to identify, classify, weigh, and also mark the relevant and expenses to face the climate crisis in the budget system of Panama government. Also, these climate change labels that are developed in this guide are based on the criteria and also the result areas of international organizations, such as the Green Climate Fund. We have also the German Cooperation Agency and also the World Bank. Next. So great. So these are the 3 climate change tagger that Panama has. We have a tagger for climate change project, and this tagger helps us to identify whether a public investment project meets adaptation, mitigation, and also cross-cutting criteria area. These are the kind of areas that are projects that has adaptation and also mitigation criteria. Likewise, this label guides also public investment project toward low emission and also climate resilient trends that are based on the guideline of the Green Climate Funds. And we have 4 action areas for this guideline. We have an area that covers projects related to adaptation. We also have projects that are related to mitigation, projects that are related to cross-cutting areas, and also we have some projects that help us to identify if a project is accomplished, the NDC, Panama NDC. So basically, this label is important for Panama in public investment process, since it enabled the transition to low emission and also climate resilient economy. This also allows us to monitor the progress of the NDC sectors of Panama and also comply with the goals of the Paris Agreement and also the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is an essential instrument to promote a new form of sustainable and also inclusive development in Panama. Also, we have the tagger for climate risk project. Through this tagger, it led us to identify mainly to the public planners to identify if there is some degree of climate vulnerability and also risk that must be managed in the place where the public project is developed. For the continuous improvement of this target, Panama is also working on a series of risk maps that will be incorporated and also which allow all the planners of public institutions to achieve safe and sustainable investment over the time, which reduce the economic loss in Panama due to climate crisis. The last climate finance target that we have is a climate finance target that it will help us to quantify how much public investment is allocated to adaptation, mitigation, and also cross-cutting areas. This target will enable us to be more efficient, more effective, and also has an equal spending on the different areas of our NDC, such as forests, energy, resilient infrastructure, and also water security. And also this identification of climate spending in Panama budget is a big step, not just in Panama, but also for the region, because it becomes a labor that will help us to make better decisions that enable us to make a transition to low greenhouses and gas and also resilient economy. Also, it is important to mention that the Ministry of Economy and Finance previously used to work with social, economic, and environmental labels, but they did not incorporate climate change component. So this represents a great opportunity for Panama projects to be born green and be more resilient to climate change effect. So this kind of project will pass from being the exception to be the normal law of the country. Next. So great. Also, Panama has started a training process based on the preparation of the manual of the implementation of climate change labels. And this process starts with already more than 51 public institution in Panama that are the institution that receive public finance from the Ministry of Economy to develop their public project. It is also important to mention that the institution that were selected and they were given priority to those that are directly or also indirectly related to the compliance of national determinant to Panama NDC. Next. Also, other actions that Panama government is making right now and the climate change agenda is that we are doing an update of the environmental impact assessment that include climate change criteria. This new update is not only going to include the identification of vulnerability and also climate risk, it also going to propose adaptation measures that gonna prioritize nature-based solution and also the reduction of carbon footprint in all the phases of the project. Next. And also soon, Panama is gonna publish its framework law on climate change. And the purpose of this law is to establish the climate governance of the Republic of Panama. Also, we're gonna develop the regulatory framework of the national response to climate change. And also we're gonna adopt other provisions and mainly related to climate finance, and adaptation for the country, also for mitigation, and also develop structure of climate change in other public institutions, not just the Ministry of Environment, but also in other public institutions as Ministry of Health and Ministry of Finance. So this is my presentation that I have prepared for you. And if you have any questions, just let me know on the chat. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Abdil. It's great to have Panama's perspective to hear about some of the programs and projects that are underway, considerations in public investment, and also Panama's status as a carbon negative country. So Maria, we will move on to you next. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the United States and specifically the Department of Energy is doing internationally to combat the climate crisis. Because while we are obviously doing a lot domestically with our three new laws, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, we are also working internationally to make sure that everyone around the world is accelerating their climate, the implementation of their climate goals. So we are doing this through two main programs. One is called Net Zero World, and we are working with countries around the world, again, to accelerate climate goal implementation, really. You make a goal, but then you have to implement it. So we are a technical agency that really looks at different solutions. And so we're looking at that. And what this program is that we are really working to try to harness and bring to bear the power and expertise of the DOE national labs. There are 17 DOE national labs spread across the country. And our secretary really wanted to bring them into the center of the climate fight. So this program is all about bringing this great expertise from our system to the climate. We're partnering with specific countries: Argentina, Chile, Indonesia, Egypt, Nigeria, and Ukraine is a partner, but obviously that work is on hold right now. And we are collaborating with these countries to co-create tailored to their country technical and investment plans that will help to achieve their own climate goals. We are not imposing climate goals on them. We're helping them to achieve their already. And so what we really hope to do with this program is to enable countries to rapidly achieve energy system-wide decarbonization at both the national and subnational levels through holistic, tailored technical and investment plans. And we are coupling that with technical assistance and implementation support, helping to scale up investment, engaging in peer-to-peer learning, taking really sustained action and access again to our labs. And also there are 9 different US government agencies that are engaged in this effort. We're doing things like technology, project design and testing, infrastructure analysis, recommendations on policies, standards, codes, things like that, capacity building and workforce development. And we're taking a really holistic, again, energy system-wide approach, which means we're not just looking at the power sector. We're looking at buildings, industry, transportation, agriculture, really system-wide. The second major program that we work on is called Mission Innovation. This is a global initiative that is really trying to catalyze a decade of action and investment in research, development, and demonstration projects, and to really work to make clean energy affordable, attractive, and accessible to all. That grouping is 23 countries plus the EU. The United States will chair the steering committee for Mission Innovation in the coming year. And one of the big things that Mission Innovation is doing is it has launched over the past year and a half 7 research missions, which are really focused on, again, catalyzing global action and setting ambitious but achievable goals that will lead to tipping points in the cost and scale up of clean energy solutions. And those 7 missions are the Green Powered Future Initiative, the Zero Emission Shipping Initiative, Clean Hydrogen, Carbon Dioxide Removal, Urban Transitions, Net Zero Industries, and Integrated Biorefineries. And the United States is leading on 3 of those, shipping, hydrogen, and carbon dioxide removal, but working in partnership with many other countries. And so I will stop there and await some questions.
Thank you, Maria, for that view on international engagement to climate diplomacy and the US's what the US is doing in that area, and also the technical assistance on offer. So Gareth, we will come on to you next, please.
Thank you. Raquel, if you could just flip through to the problem slide. So, I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle, very much bottom up here. Although it's worth making the point, although this webinar is about climate change, it's about a lot of other things that is impacted or is affected by or contributes to. So the bottom line is we're facing an existential threat from the combined impact of climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution. And there is this concept of the 9 boundaries framework, which shows us how close we are or over the safe parameters of where we need to be as a civilization. So a lot is required to get done. And what you've heard from the other panelists is there is a lot of work going on at high level political policy to try to help to encourage the change. Next slide. So Advanced Bacterial Sciences is a company set up 3 years ago. And essentially what we are doing is looking at ways that bacteria in nature are solving problems for the treatment of waste. We're both from a restorative point of view, but regenerative. And we're applying science. We have 16 scientists today, biologists, chemists, engineers, looking at how do we create intelligent design for products that will work and make a difference. Basically, we do what nature does, but we turbocharge that. Next slide. I want to say, really bring it down to basics here. Everybody asks the question, what can we do? And there's an awful lot that can be done. And I want to use a very basic example today to demonstrate how solving a simple problem of odors and blockages in urinals can lead to very significant sustainability co-benefits. There's a saying in Northern England, where there's muck, there's brass. And what I'm going to demonstrate to you is that there are lots of hidden assets that we don't really think about, that if applied in aggregate will result in very significant carbon savings and other co-benefits. So we set out to solve this problem of what is causing the buildup of uric acid in urinals and creating the blockages and smells. Many people have transitioned to waterless urinals. In theory, they're great because they reduce the amount of water that you need to solve the problem. The problem is that they don't move the uric acid crystals. You get hardening with salts, you get inorganic limescale building up, and that leads to the problems that we get. And most people will have experienced walking into men's urinal or walking past it and that terrible smell. It really is awful. And there are many biological solutions, enzymatic solutions, to try to deal with that problem. The reality is they just don't work. There's not enough of them. They're passive. They emulsify the problem and they push it further downstream. So we came at this from the perspective of trying to find something that was non-toxic, non-pathogenic, that worked. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend time on this, but basically there are lots of different applications for dealing with this problem. They're expensive, they don't work, they create problems. Next slide. So I'm not going to dwell on this slide afterwards, but basically what you can see in this slide is what happens when you get this buildup of uric acid. The top left slide is a university in the UK. The before slide just showed the buildup of the uric acid in the urinal pipes 6 weeks later after our treatment, completely clear. And the other slides basically show different levels of problems and how we cleared that after a six-week period. Next slide, please. So what is the benefit of this? So what I'm going to show you is some slides on sustainability and the co-benefits. But by doing this, what we're also able to demonstrate is that we can reduce water almost to zero. The product that we've designed basically doesn't require any water. It's a non-pathogenic, non-toxic powder. Each is 25-gram scoop that we use has 50 billion bacteria in it, and they're active and they seek out and they digest the uric acid in situation. Because we don't need water, that means you don't need to pump it around. That can reduce energy, you can reduce carbon emissions. I'll show you some significant reductions in single-use plastics, and most importantly, you can stop using bad chemicals, toxic chemicals, which are a danger to health, but also have downstream impacts and damage infrastructure. Not only is it very good for the environment, it's proven to save a lot of money, not only upfront, up to 50% savings compared to business as usual, but up to 8 to 10 times the avoided cost of having to do call-outs. Next slide, please. Next slide. So what we did over the summer, we did 7 trials at 7 different sites. And what we looked at and to measure was the sustainability benefits. So car manufacturer, we reduced the amount of spending on urinal maintenance by 50%. We reduced the amount of chemicals by 100%, which would have saved about 50% of the cost at a big tourist attraction up in Edinburgh. As a data center, because you don't need, because you haven't got the odors, you don't need deodorizers, we were able to reduce those costs significantly. And at a college, where this college had 30 blockages and call-outs in 12 months, we've reduced that to 0. Next slide, please. Water use. By using our product and extrapolating that to 1,000 urinals, this would have saved 2.8 liters per annum from 1,000 urinals. It's a massive amount of water saved. Interestingly enough, the university, which I showed you the foul photograph of earlier, had a waterless urinal. So they weren't using any water, but they had the biggest problems. It's about getting a balance. Chemical use, based on the trials we had, we'd have saved 11,200 liters per annum from 1,000 urinals. Next slide. Really interestingly, because a lot of these smart systems use cartridges and mats to try and cover the odors and these enzymatic strips, by not having to use those, we could have saved about 4 tons of plastic per annum in 1,000 urinals. That's equivalent to 22 tons of carbon dioxide. Air refresheners, there's a huge amount of aluminium and metals used in cans and other things that are used in air refresheners. We just saved 1,000 urinals, about 16 kilograms of aluminium. That's 0.3 tons of CO2. Next slide, please. And then if you look at the savings across those sites in aggregate and extrapolate that to 1,000 urinals, that would have saved about 25 tons of carbon per annum. Now, if you think globally how many urinals there are in use, that will add up to thousands of tons that can be saved by using nature-based solutions efficiently rather than using chemicals and other systems. And these savings are only on direct savings and do not include the savings that would come from the upstream and downstream impact of the manufacturing and the processing and the need to manage the issues downstream. So that 25 tons could be multiplied many times. Most importantly, from a consumer point of view, the product gets rid of odors, and that for everybody is a very happy outcome. So in conclusion, what I'm saying here is that there are lots of things that we don't really think about. And if we think about how we can actually make these simple changes that are both cost effective and good for the environment, we can make a massive impact in aggregate reductions in carbon. And these are really where we are trying to focus as a company. We have problems that resolve the buildup of grease and grease traps. We've got products that will break down buildup of sludge in soil stacks. We have products that will work with agriculture to improve the methane efficiency in anaerobic digestive plants. We can break down slurry to make it more efficient. There is so much that we can do, that we are scratching the surface of. And the great news is that there is no compromise in terms of trade-off of cost and the environment. And having been on the sort of bleeding edge for 20 years of transitioning to low carbon, working with many types of technologies, this is such a really exciting and fundamental area to be in. And I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gareth, for that look at how solving relatively simple problems could lead to much more significant and positive outcomes. Maybe something for governments to think about in terms of their own operations, buildings, facilities management, and that kind of thing as well. All right, so just a reminder for the audience, if you have any questions, please do type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. I will start with a question to kick off the discussion. So just going back to sort of the Paris Agreement and the pledges that came out of COP26. There are concerns that some countries have made climate pledges without sufficiently detailing how they're going to fulfill those pledges or reach their targets, while some have made commitments and then rode back on them. The IPCC is one of the bodies to have warned about this. How much of a worry is that, and what can be done to hold the governments to account on the pledges they've made? Jim, I would like to come to you first.
Yeah, thanks. It's a very good question. It is a worry constantly that because many pledges are made either in the heat of the moment, or they are, headlines, but without the detailed plans to deliver them. And even, a place like where I am in the UK, which has a fairly well developed governance approach to all this, there are some quite serious gaps in, the implementation and so on. And so it is a concern. I think in terms of holding to account, I think although the international system, the yearly jamboree of conferences of the parties like COP26 and COP27 that's coming up, help, I think in the end, governments answer much more closely to their own constituencies. So it's public pressure from within those countries, that really matters. And, as one of our former climate change secretaries said, the minister responsible for all of this, if the public asked for more action, that then would have given him, when he was in office, much more license to act. Otherwise, if that's not coming up in the top 3 issues, which it is at the moment, then, it does give governments an excuse not to act as coherently. So I think, it's the pressure within country that really counts. The court of public opinion internationally helps, but I think that's probably secondary.
Maria, would you like to answer that question too?
Yeah, sorry for turning my camera off, but my internet is a little unstable. Can you hear me?
We can hear you okay, yes.
Okay. So I think a couple things. I think, first of all, what we need to do is work together to help everybody. A rising tide lifts all boats. So let's be working together to try to meet all of our climate goals. Obviously, the United States has taken its goals quite seriously, again, with the new legislation, which is a huge investment, the biggest investments in US history to curb emissions and promote clean energy technology and advance environmental justice and bolster adaptation. So, we as a country are really taking our goals very seriously. And then our Net Zero World program, again, is meant to work with countries who would like to partner with us. Again, we are not telling.
I think we've got connection issues with
We are
you
not
there,
telling
Maria.
them with again.
You've frozen there, Maria. What I may do is go on to one of the other panelists for now, and if we can come back to you when your connections are a bit more stable, we will try to do that. Abjl or Gareth, would you like to come in on that question?
Yeah, I mean, having spent 20 years working with different types of technologies across that whole spectrum we talked about earlier, I know that we have the technologies that can solve this problem, and it does need the political will, as Maria says, of working together to do that and believing that we can do it. There will be frustrations, there will be interruptions, but we need to work much more collectively, I think. There's a lot of wasted activity. There are lots of stranded assets because people are running in parallel tracks. And a system, if governments could work together to bring some of these technologies through that are competing with each other, but let's get the people, the brains around it to make these things happen, it will happen much more quickly. If we think of it as solving the moonshot, as has been done, there's a huge amount we can do. So you know, the markets work very efficiently. Sometimes I think we're in a crisis like we are, we need to look very carefully at what is the right structure to encourage the investment that's required. And we need policy signals that are very clear and long-term to enable that market to work. And I think part of the challenge I've seen over the past 20 years is governments bringing policies in, creating frameworks, and then changing it. And that lack of continuity and that lack of consistency, that lack of commitment is the biggest challenge. We had a global financial crisis where we could have been investing billions into green, clean technologies. It didn't happen at a pace that was required. And there have been a number of situations like that. And we can see where the fault lines are, and we just need to make sure that we are working together to get stuff done.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. Abjl.
So definitely related to this question about what governments can hold into account and also include this climate topic, I think definitely, and as the convention said, we have to just increase ambition, and also, and in the time that we are increasing this ambition related to climate change, maybe it could be adaptation topics, mitigation topics, and also cross-cutting and topic, we should be monitoring and also searching if we are reaching to this goal that we established and on our NDC, and also be more ambitious on our way to reach net zero goal for every country.
Okay, Maria, I don't know if you can hear us and whether you want to finish the answer you were giving us earlier.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave my camera off because I think that keeps my internet a little bit more stable. I'm not 100% sure where I cut out, but what I was saying is that in working together through our Net Zero World program, this is exactly what we are trying to do. Again, we have some resources that we can offer. We can work with experts in different countries to really come up with these solutions so that we're not only making the climate pledges, but we're actually implementing and taking action on those pledges, which is really, obviously the most important thing so that we are reaching our goals. And, we, the United States, has decided that we would very much like to be a part of the global community and working together, because this is a global problem and we do all need to put, all of our great heads together to solve it effectively. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria. I wanted to go on, Jim, to what you were saying in your answer there about sort of growing pressure from citizens. We've seen in countries like Canada, Australia, and Germany that climate change is becoming a key issue among the electorate, driven in part by increasing frequency and severity of weather events like bushfires and flooding. Traditionally, governments have focused on policies that drive short-term results to lead them into the next election. But do you think now that there's a real sea change happening and that governments are perhaps less engaged in climate action will have to sit up and take notice of growing pressure from citizens?
I think they should do, but clearly they're under pressure on all sorts of fronts at the moment. So, security is high on the agenda, prices are high on the agenda, as is climate. So, that's why I was saying in my opening remarks, in a way, what the European Union has done, which is basically to use the fact that we've got high prices and a security threat to really double down on the climate action they're engaging in, with obviously some other things because of managing, for example, the supply of gas through this winter, I think is the right response. But I also think, rather than just seeing this as a matter of responding to public pressure, I also think, governments need to be creative in finding ways to involve the public in the design and the priorities that they're engaging in. Because otherwise, I think many people will feel that these plans come from elsewhere and are actually being imposed on them, especially if there is a cost implication. So, for example, I was involved in the UK's Citizens' Assembly on climate change. I was one of the advisors to it, which reported well over a year ago now. And that was a really good exercise because they took a genuine cross-section of the public from all sorts of areas of the country, representing all income groups, all genders, all points of view on climate, actually, but that got them together through a process to actually help decide on a set of priorities. How are we going to meet this net zero target and do it in a fair way and an equitable way? Now, that didn't, of course, solve the UK's problem, but that sort of exercise, I think we're going to have to use a lot more. I think governments should consider using those a lot more. It means they let go of control of the agenda to some extent, but it means that perhaps they come up with an answer that's actually that at least some members of the public have been involved in designing, which I think might work better in the long run.
Thank you. Maria and Abjl, you've both got your hands up. Maria, I think yours went up first, so we will come to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in addition to just the general public interest in the issues, there is also a very strong business opportunity here. It's really a $23 trillion opportunity for businesses. So it's not just that governments are responding to public pressure. They're creating, it's creating an opportunity for businesses to bring their solutions to bear as well, and also benefit from this economy. And I agree 100% with Jim that what we are seeing in Europe is really a trigger for an underscore that we need to deploy, innovate and deploy as quickly as we possibly can to effectuate the clean energy transition, but we also need to manage it in an effective way. Thanks.
Yeah, very good point there on the effect and cost savings for businesses as well. Abjl, I'll come to you. I know Panama has a very engaged young population when it comes to climate change.
Yeah, definitely. As we're seeing, climate change impacts is gonna increase in different regions of the world. We already saw the news about what is happening in Florida and United States, the heat waves that we have in Europe, also the flooding that we are seeing in the Pacific Ocean of Asia, also the forests and fires that is happening in Brazil, also in California. Also Panama, as a small country, is losing, and the sea is increasing in Panama, and also we're seeing some islands that are disappearing. It is important to mention that loss and damage is not only a topic about developing countries, small countries. Is already a topic for developed countries as United States, as some countries of Europe, and it's a problem that is attacking in all countries in different ways. So I think that every citizen of the planet will ask for more action and also inclusion of climate change in the public policies of the incoming governments. For example, Panama is already going to present the law of climate change, and that is going to establish all the structure of climate change inside our country. Also, for young people, climate change is not a will, it is something that is already happening, and is one of the biggest trends that we're already seeing on social media. And also it is listed as one of the biggest problems for young generation, seeing as the ways government is tackling in this situation. So in my personal opinion, I think that is not a trend in the future. It is already the moment. So what we're gonna get done and for establish a temperature and also adapting all the communities that are getting effect for climate change impacts.
Thank you very much, Abjl. I have a question here from Jamie Holdstock, and this is directed at you, Gareth. Can you speak about how technologies within ABS are being used to mitigate the impact of climate change from an agricultural industry perspective?
Okay, so we, as I said, we have products which are specifically focused on the built environment. I talk specifically about cleaning up waste in urinals. We can do the same things in waste generally in built environment. There's also a lot of nutrient issues with nitrates and phosphates getting into water systems. We're seeing it in the UK, big issues in the Netherlands, but just generally around the world, the amount of nitrates and phosphates that are running off agriculture. So we're looking at solutions that will not only reduce the amount of nitrates coming back. So from a built environment perspective, we're looking to add on a sort of bioreactor tank onto traditional septic tank type systems that will digest the waste. And what the bacteria do is they turn the waste into water and a little bit of CO2. So whether that is the uric acid scale or whether it's the fats and greases that build up from kitchens and other types of units, or whether it's the waste in a manufacturing process, bacteria do this. So what we do is we're finding those strains which work in nature most effectively, and we package those with the nutrients which actually then encourage them to colonize and convert that waste. So by doing it naturally, we are not using chemicals. Chemicals are high energy intensive to produce. We are reducing the amount of plastics I mentioned, so that's mitigating the amount of carbon required for those plastics. We're reducing the amount of energy in terms of water that's required to pump these things around. We're reducing the amount of energy that's required in water pumping stations, or getting to clear out fatbergs. So there are lots of different applications. Specifically in agriculture, I mentioned we're looking actually to increase the methane fraction in AD plants. So you get more energy out of that, but we're extracting more value out of that, reducing the amount of emissions. We're also looking at ways of helping plants take up more of the nutrients from the soil with plant-assisted bacteria to make that process more efficient, therefore requiring less energy intensive and high carbon fertilizer to be used. Natural ways of making things happen. And we're looking to treat the runoff from fields of the fertilizers, the nitrates and phosphates, which go into the rivers and cause eutrophication, etc. So there are many, many different applications of that. I could go on for hours, but there are many applications, and if you look at our website, you'll see some of them. But very, very happy to have a specific conversation with the person asking the question.
Thank you, Gareth. I know we have quite a few people joining from agriculture ministries, so I don't know if anyone else on the panel wants to speak more generally about what their countries are doing on climate change in agriculture specifically. In that case, I will move on to another question from the audience. So Yulia Fedorenko asks, different countries have different financial resources available to them. As a result, the amount of money allocated to climate change solutions varies. Are there any climate change solutions, policies, or programs that most countries can implement regardless of their economic situation? Maria, can I come to you first on the one?
Sure. I mean, obviously that is correct, right? We have different countries with different economic situations and different ability to afford different technologies. And, I think one of the things that DOE does and is really trying to do is to drive down the cost of those technologies. And that is what Mission Innovation is trying to do as well, is to drive down the cost. A lot of the research at DOE and through Mission Innovation are really focused on driving down the cost of these technologies so that they can be more accessible and deployed more widely. And that's again, the research is not, and innovation is not just going into creating new technologies. It's really going into driving down the cost. For example, our solar sunshot program really drove down the cost of solar. We now have a program called Energy Earthshots, where we're looking at very key technologies and again, trying to drive down the cost of those technologies through our research. Thank you.
Thanks. Abjl, would you like to come in on that question?
Definitely agree with what Maria is speaking about. As well, having each country have different incomes, different budgets, the way they assign money on this climate change topic. I think one of the greatest solution for it will be, reducing the cost of technology, but also strengthening the capacity of people that are vulnerable to the climate change impacts, because many of those people, they don't have the funds and also the resources to access to, for example, to clean energy, to water security. So I think it will be an interesting topic, and also definitely agree with what Maria speak about, reducing the cost of technology, but also make it strengthen the capacity of people that are not able to access to it. So that will be my answer for now.
Jim, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah. I mean, my first instinct would be to say no in answer to the question, because of the reason that Abjl and Maria said. All countries are different, and certainly some of the countries I work with through the Foreign Office program I'm working with, which are the lowest income countries in the world, their financial resources are, of course, a lot less than a country like the UK or the US. But having said that, I think Maria has a point that in some areas, the costs of those, technologies such as wind and solar has fallen dramatically, partly due to innovation, but partly actually due to mass deployment. Deploying them on a very large scale and scaling up manufacturing has brought those costs down to a very large level. I think that the caveat for deploying those in countries which don't have resources is that often that is coupled with not having fully developed finance systems and governance systems and policy systems, all those other things you need to successfully deploy, renewable energy technologies. So it's not just a matter of cost, it's actually a matter of, can you get the financing? And those are two very different things. So you can have a very low cost technology, but actually it costs a lot to finance in some situations because the risks are high. Because rules and regulations aren't clear, or because finance systems aren't fully developed, etc. So often, in those countries, some assistance is required with those enabling frameworks, with the finance itself, to bring down the cost of finance, etc. But I think that's probably where to start, is those areas where you've really got those low cost technologies, and so wind and solar are very good examples of that.
Thank you, Jim. Gareth, do you have a view on that?
I think energy efficiency is an area where, demonstrated a long time ago that you can do things that actually save you money. And it's like, why wouldn't you do that and implement that? And example, what we're doing, you save money and you are benefiting the environment. So I think there are solutions. I think when you get into high tech, as it's quite correct, you look at the cost curves, you look at how solar and wind costs have come down massively, and it will be the same for batteries, and it will be the same for lots of other technologies, but it does need the adoption to get to that point where you can reduce the costs to get that mass adoption. And it's, we've seen what's happened with mobile phone technologies in developing markets. I mean, mass adoption. And I think finding those type of solutions within clean and green tech, they're there. It just needs, to be implemented.
Yeah, thank you. I'm jumping around a little bit here, but I want to go back to what some of you were saying about the need to sort of swim together in one direction to make sort of real and meaningful change. And Abjl, you spoke about Panama being one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, and there's only so much that you can do domestically to promote environmental sustainability. Countries like Panama are reliant on the world's governments to make changes that will protect it and other nations. And while we're moving in a positive direction, we perhaps haven't seen the action on the scale that it needs to happen yet. So Abjl, what do you say to the high emitting countries who perhaps aren't pulling their weight at the moment?
Sorry, may you repeat the question? Just say what I said, and to the high emission countries for the way to.
Yeah, so the high emitting countries that perhaps aren't pulling their weight in terms of action on climate change at the moment. sort of speaking on behalf of Panama and other nations that are particularly vulnerable to climate change.
Okay, so definitely first I would say, as we all know, reduce the emission, because we know the more emissions that we are sending to the atmosphere, the more impacts we're going to see on the climate change. We're already seeing it, what is happening on different areas of the world. I wouldn't just say, the most poorest countries of the world, and also in high incomes countries of the world, because we all are seeing the impacts of the climate change. Also, an important topic that Jim mentions during his intervention on the previous question, and he said that it's important, to reduce the cost of technology, but how we, the countries that are being more affected of climate change effect, are going to access to climate finance, because as we all know, access to climate finance is very tough, and it means a lot of difficulty, a lot of process, and also it takes a lot of years, and time is what we don't have right now. Seeing that, for example, many countries present a project to the Green Climate Fund, it could be to the Adaptation Fund, and also the Global Environment Facility. And also the resources take more than 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And also by the time that those resources reach, the impacts are even more bigger than the time that we plan those projects. So I think an interesting topic that we should be seeing at COP, and also at COP27 in Egypt, will be how we can reduce the amount of time, to access to climate finance, because the emergency is now and we have to act now. This will be directly for the countries that doesn't have the resources to, to tackle climate change. One of the actions that Panama government, as I mentioned before, has been working on is, trying to use the public resources that we have on our budget system to allocate it, and also to allocate it on different areas for the country, such as agriculture, but also that it includes climate change criteria, maybe adaptation, mitigation, in the meantime that these international resources could reach, so we could tackle, climate change.
Thank you for that. So we've spoken about sort of financing and resources, and we've got another question here from Ignatius Limin. Financing climate projects requires a huge commitment from private sectors, mainly hard to abate sectors. Are there any success stories from the US, UK and Panama to attract their investment pipeline and having shared goals of reducing emissions? Jim, would you like to come in on that one?
Yeah, difficult question, actually. I think particularly if you want to see success stories from start to finish, but certainly in the UK, I think it's unfinished business if you're thinking about the hard to abate sectors, some of the like fuel, chemicals, cement, etc. There are certainly plans, for example, to develop clusters with hydrogen used instead of fossil fuels. So that would be hydrogen, the green hydrogen so-called, from renewable electricity, not hydrogen from natural gas, which at the moment seems pretty pointless to me, given how high natural gas prices are. So we certainly have plans, and government's doing a fair bit of very detailed work on, how you get contractual structures for that hydrogen and for those clusters to decarbonise. But at the moment, that policy is very much still in development and consultation. So I'm sort of at the stage where I'll believe it when things start to actually happen on the ground, and that will take some time. But I think that's probably the closest we've got to, addressing the question that was raised, certainly here. There are probably better examples in other countries.
Would anyone else like to come in on that one?
Sorry, Mia, I do apologize. May you repeat the question? How we can?
Yeah, so it's so financing climate projects requires a huge commitment from private sectors. And are there any success stories? Can you give any success stories from Panama of how to attract investment?
Okay, and right now, Panama government as a whole is working and also on the development of a taxonomy, taking Europe taxonomy, as we all know, is a system that classifies projects and that can contribute in adaptation and also mitigation. And we are currently developing in a project similar to the criteria that Europe takes and for attract and private investment. So it's not just depending on the public investment for develop adaptation and also mitigation process, but also attract and private projects so they can contribute to climate change crisis. But this will be, taking an example of another country that we, the developing countries, can take in account to attract those resources that are coming from banks, many insurance, another in international private institutions. That will be like a successful example, the taxonomy of Europe Union.
Thank you, Maria. Can I come to you on that one?
Yeah, so just going to the industrial decarbonization issue, I mean, that is really a very big and important topic. And there is a lot of focus on that topic, both in the United States, where DOE has actually released an industrial decarbonization roadmap, and internationally through programs like Mission Innovation, where there is an industrial decarbonization mission. And focusing on issues like that will attract the investment because, it will create, again, jobs, it will spur economic growth, and it's going to, again, create the cleaner future as well. Going back to my point that it is a $23 trillion business opportunity, we are seeing, businesses recognize that and are taking advantage of that and being engaged in the clean energy technologies. I am actually right now at a conference on the built environment, and there's a lot of companies here saying, yes, we need to be leaders, we need to be engaging, we need to be deploying our technology, we need to be making our technologies cleaner. So there is a strong interest from the business sector because they are recognizing the opportunity that it presents. Thanks.
And Gareth, perhaps you can give us your perspective on that from a sort of private sector standpoint.
There's no shortage of capital for the right type of projects, I think. It's more challenging perhaps today. And if the right conditions are there and there's the right degree of sort of certainty, I mean, nothing is certain, things can go wrong. But again, it comes back to the policy framework needs to allow large amounts of capital to be deployed, where you're not going to get a change retrospectively or effectively retrospectively going forward. I mean, we've seen in the UK, for example, a good solar tariff arrangement basically being cut in half, and a lot of businesses going out of business because it was uneconomic. 2 years later, costs had come down, it was back in the money. So you can take views and you can take risk. The carbon market is a classic example where, we in Climate Change Capital, we had $1 billion carbon fund back in the sort of the 2003, 2008, with some very big institutions investing in that, looking to make decent returns through investing in carbon emission reduction projects. And in 2008, 2009, the market collapsed. It just wasn't structured in a way that would allow for that long-term certainty. Money will be deployed. I mean, billions have been deployed, but lots of money has been lost. There's technology risk, there's policy risk, and I think the technology risk is actually easier to understand and deal with. It's the policy risk which is more challenging.
Thank you, Gareth. We are very nearly out of time, so I will just ask one final question, as this is one of our webinars that we're running in the lead up to COP27. So perhaps each of you could just speak for about 30 seconds each on what you hope to come out of COP27. Maria, I'll come to you first, please.
Great. So again, I think what we are really focused on at the Department of Energy is action and turning the ambition into action. So we just had a big conference in Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago where we really, again, focused on what are we doing to take action. And so I think we hope that going into COP, countries will not only think about their ambition, but how they will implement and take action on that ambition.
Thank you, Abjl.
And sorry, and so I think one of the most interesting topic, related to COP27, I will definitely say more inclusion of young people, women, and also indigenous people in the round table. As we all know, they are the most effect on climate change impacts. Also, I would say higher levels of commitment to help vulnerable countries to adapt and also become more resilient. Also, taking in this round table, the impacts that the developed country is having right now. Also, it's important to mention that on the last COP, there was a mechanism called, Santiago Network that definitely is, acknowledging the topic of loss and damage, a topic that we have never seen before on negotiations. So I think a fund that seek actions to help minimize and also address loss and damage. And also very important, as Maria says, that I think this should be the direction of each country is, turning the ambitions in actions and also increase the transparency in every country. So I think those could be, the main topics that should be discussed on the roundtables and during COP27 in Egypt.
Thank you, Gareth.
Turning pledges into actions, realistic targets, and being able to demonstrate this is how these companies are going to do it. This is how the governments in aggregate are going to take those individual corporate targets and turn them into action plans. Otherwise, it's just more noise, I'm afraid.
Yeah, okay. And finally, Jim.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Abjl said. This is a COP that's going to be in Africa, and therefore I think it ought to focus on the needs of low-income countries first and foremost. That includes continuing the discussion, actually doing something about loss and damage. But I also think, more deals like the one done with South Africa in Glasgow, which is to say, well, it's a package of finance to help you as a country develop your energy system in a different way to the way you are going to go otherwise. I think many countries could benefit from such packages, and the options are there, the technologies are there, but it's all about the financial package. And I think we need more specific deals like that to actually get a wider set of countries to shift to a lower carbon development trajectory than they otherwise would be on.
Okay, thank you very much all. I will bring this session to a close there. I'm sure you'll all agree that there were some fascinating insights there into what governments can do to tackle climate change. Hopefully you find it useful. Thank you very much to our panel and to you in the audience for watching. And thanks to Advanced Bacterial Sciences for joining us as our knowledge partner today. You will be receiving a recording of the webinar in the next few days, and also a report on the topics covered in the webinar in the next few weeks. Before that, though, there will be a survey that should be in your inbox now to get your thoughts on today's session. So if you could provide feedback, it would be really helpful for us here at the Global Government Board team to make sure that we are providing the best possible content. Also, any ideas on topics that you would like to see us cover in future webinars would be welcome. I mentioned this at the beginning, and I want to flag that this is part of a series of climate change focused webinars we are running in the lead up to COP27 in Egypt next month. The next webinar, which you can see detailed on this slide, is Staying on Track, How to Fund Infrastructure Projects as Governments' Borrowing Costs Rise. that takes place tomorrow. We also have Adapt to Survive, how governments need to deal with climate impacts, which takes place this Thursday. We have Money for Net Zero, how finance ministries can help support global climate action, next Tuesday, the 18th of October. And we have Playing by the Paris Rulebook, what countries need to do now to measure their climate change goals, on 20th of October. You can see a full list of our upcoming webinars on our website, globalgovernmentforum.com, under the events tab. So once again, thank you very much everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you at another one of our webinars soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.